Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Testing. What's up, Cole? Hey, Sharon. Is the audio okay? Can you hear me now? Hey, Guppy Crib, welcome to the stream. Hey, Richard, can you guys hear me? Awesome. I noticed that XSplit updated itself again this time. It said something about bug fixes, so maybe it's going after the issues that we've been running into. I noticed that Joel on Corvus Ocean has been having a lot of issues lately, and I've been having issues, and several people that I've spoken to that run XSplit have had issues, so maybe they decided they better fix it. I'm coming up on the end of my free, when I bought my Logitech web camera, I got 3 months free, so I'm coming up on the end of my free version, and I wrote them and I told them, I said, look, I'm having all these issues. Why would I want to start paying for this product if I can't use it to do what I want to? So maybe they listened and decided they better get off their butts and fix this issue. I was casting about. Welcome RFB, welcome Richard Huff, welcome Akash. I was casting around about what to do this stream about, and let's see, I misspelled hardness, and I decided that I've seen a lot of videos lately and a lot of stuff in live streams about hardness and what it means to your aquarium and what it means to the fish in your aquarium. And we're talking KH and GH here. And I haven't done any deep digging research beforehand. I'm kind of winging this, but I think that it's a valid issue to discuss, because it has a real effect on your fish tanks. It has a real effect on your fish. You know, some fish come from low pH areas, rivers. Sorry. Rivers, lakes, that sort of thing. They are, where do I source water from? From my tap or from my RO unit, Akash? I'm not sure what you mean exactly by that question. I assume you're asking me where I get my water from. My local water, up until about 7 months ago, was coming out of the tap at about 400 to 500 TDS with a great deal of calcium in it and pretty high mineral content. It was from a deep well that's local to the area. There's 2 places where my local water comes from. One is wells that are driven really near the Ohio River, and 2 is an old ammunition plant from back in the war that had really deep wells drilled, and Indiana sits on the Cambian Shield, which is a geological formation, and it's a lot of limestone rock, and limestone gives high KH, high GH, and high pH to water. So up until about 6 or 8 months ago, my local tap water was coming out, like I said, high TDS, high GH, high KH, high mineral content. And then all of a sudden, as winter came along, it suddenly dropped to under 200 TDS. And I think what happened was that the water level in the old ammunition plant wells started getting low. So they started pulling water from the near the river wells. And those wells near the river probably draw river water in. It probably seeps in. And so suddenly we were getting 180, 107. Hey Joel, welcome to the stream, man. Suddenly we were getting 180, 170 TDS water, which is pretty low. Hey Victor, welcome to the stream. Pretty low on TDS, and the pH is about the same, maybe a little lower, and there was no notification, of course, from the local water supply people, and I called the guy up. I called up the water supply, and they finally shuffled me off to some guy whose job it is to watch the quality of the water out of our local area. And I told him, I said, we've had a big change in our water supply. I said, have you guys started using some new water source or something? And he said, what do you mean a big change? And I said, well, my TDS went from 500 to 200 in a couple of days. And he said, that's impossible. And I said, well, it's not impossible. I said, I keep fish and I watch my water pretty closely, and I tested it because I noticed a change in the way my fish were reacting to it. And he said, well, that's not possible. And I said, well, then I need you to go do a TDS check on the local water that's coming out now and get back to me if you can tell me what's going on. Of course, he never got back to me. Guppy Crib says, my TDS is 390 out of the tap. Well, I've noticed after a day or so in the tanks, it drops a tad. Is some of the minerals, chemicals gassing off? Guppy Crib, that's possible, but do you have plants in your tank? Because if you have plants in your tank, they will remove minerals out of the water, and so sometimes your TDS will drop because the minerals are being removed by plants. Sometimes your TDS will drop because you have a lot of driftwood in your tank. Sometimes your TDS will rise because there's a lot of nitrate or ammonia or nitrite in your tank as well, because all of those produce ions that a TDS meter will read as well. Hey Bob, welcome to the Bob Show, named after you. Akash says, my tap water is also high in TDS, KH, and pH in my area because of use of cement pipes and storage. I had to switch to RO as well. Don't have a DI on my unit, can't find any here. Well, Akash, I definitely recommend DI, which DI stands for deionization. In other words, it deionizes the water, and that is because heavy metals can also cause ions in the water, and a DI unit will remove those heavy metals. The RO units usually have a fiber filter and a carbon filter, and then they run through the RO membrane, the reverse osmosis membrane, and then in units that have a DI, it then goes into the DI unit, and the heavy metals are removed at that point. And I highly recommend that to anybody that's running city water, because you just really don't know what kind of heavy metals are going to end up in that water. Hey Kevin, welcome to the stream. JW Aquariums, welcome to the stream. JW, did you get to 200? Psychedelic Babe, how you doing? I saw that you ran a live stream on your bomb shelter, Babe. When I get a chance, I'll check that out. And Kevin asks what our topic is today, and basically I thought we'd spend a little time talking about TDS, KH, and GH, or hardness, in our tanks. Joel says he's always wanted Shelleys, and that they're like $50 each year. You should be able to find a better price than that, Joel. JW is 15 away from 200. If anybody hasn't subbed JW, you probably ought to get over there and give him a sub. Yama says, hello Dwayne. All's passing by to say hello to everyone. Have a good live stream. Thank you, Yama, for dropping through. Babe says that she has fluoride in her tap water, so she knows that her fish don't have any cavities in their teeth. And she also said that they went in the bomb shelter today. I saw that was the subject of the live stream before I got on here to run my live stream. Of course, I had to update XSplit, so it took a little longer than I expected. JW says they were only $5.99 here in Pennsylvania. Well, Joel is in New Zealand, and things seem to be outrageously expensive in Australia and New Zealand compared to us. They have some really strange laws about importing, and it's they can get rainbows cheap. You guys get rainbows a lot cheaper than we do because you can go to your local rivers and catch them. But Kevin asks how many rainbows can he fit in his 55-gallon. He currently has 11. Kevin, what size rainbows do you have? How large are they going to get? How much real estate are they going to take up in the tank? Bob would probably tell you that you could put 100 of them in there if you so desired and were willing to do the necessary water change to keep them. Hey Nisi, welcome to the stream. I'm low-key at work trying to get ahead on paperwork. Good luck with your paperwork, Nisi. Yeah, Joel says basically anything that can live in the wild in New Zealand is illegal, as it will inevitably be released and affect our otherwise long-time isolated unique ecosystem. Hey Dion, welcome to the stream. Joel, as bad as it makes fish keeping for you guys down there, I can't be anything but empathetic with the government that wants to keep your local endemic fish, the only fish that are in rivers. If one person released a pregnant tilapia in you guys' water, they would wipe out your native fishes in a matter of weeks. So, okay, Kevin says he's got 11 Gorda River rainbows. I've got 7 of those in a 75 with one Bellerai, a couple of off-the-wall rainbows that I don't know exactly what are, one turquoise rainbow, and so I'm going to tell you that you should probably end up in the 10 to 20 area with those fish. I wouldn't go much more than you have until they grow out and your tank gets to gets pretty used to it, and then you might add more. Now you can add some smaller rainbows, like thread fins or stuff like that. Babe, I'm gonna mod you. I basically run a mod wall here, so welcome to the mod wall, babe. And Joel says, oh yeah, I understand the stance. I follow a group, New Zealand Native Fish, on Facebook, and it's enlightening in terms of the ecology of New Zealand. It has made me think differently. The lady's name is Stella McQueen. Yeah. Ruru, how did you not get a mod? And Dion, I think we can trust Dion. So one of these days in 20 years or so, when I get to have 1,000 people in my live streams, I've got my mod wall set up for trolls. Yeah, I realize that, Ruru, but I thought I had modded you before. Anyway, I thought that it would be good for us to talk about some of our local fish hardnesses, the water hardness of the habitats where they come from. Joel can give us some information, if he has it, on local water hardness in New Zealand. Others of you that live in other parts of the world can chime in and talk about what your local fish are and what their hardnesses are. Ruru, I'm not worried about it. If I get bored with you being a mod, I'll kick you. Ooh, a Dion and PB collaboration. That sounds pretty fun. You two would make a great live stream. Whatever your water comes out of your tap at, you need to... hey, King Lee, welcome to the stream. You need to understand what you're getting out of the tap and how that relates to what kind of fish you are keeping. Because if you buy, Charles and Bob have been talking about Ultim Angels here lately. Ultim Angels come out of a Blackwater River area in South America, Brazil, a little bit in Colombia, and maybe a little in Peru. I'm not quite sure about that. But it is a blackwater environment where no plants grow in the river. There's too much tannin in the water for sunlight to reach the bottom and give plants the photosynthesis that they need. It is a very low pH environment, and low pH is on the acidic side, so it is a very acid-like water. And acid is the inverse of KH and GH. Hardness is neutral to 7.5, although there are some instances where 6.8 and 6.7 and 6.6 can also have a certain amount of hardness in them. Most of the Ultim Angel wild caught fish areas that we are talking about are a pH of 4. Hey, Aquarium Cop, welcome to the stream. Dion, yes. RO water is acidic in the sense that it has all of its buffering qualities, KH hardness, GH hardness, removed from the water, And because of that, what happens when you remove all the hardness from water is that the pH is very unstable. It may come out at 7 pH like Ruru is telling you, but and while 7 pH states that it's neutral, it's not acidic and it's not hard, it's neutral, the water buffering is non-existent. So if you put that in a tank with a piece of driftwood or a couple of plants or some fish that are going to have waste in the tank, that pH will drop dramatically on you. And that's one of the things that makes this topic important to how we keep fish. Yeah, babe, you can get RO water that's in the neutral range, but it has no buffering capacity to it. Anything that hits that water is going to cause it to drop dramatically in pH. You may put that RO water in your tank at 7.1 one day, and as long as you don't have any buffering minerals either added to the water or already in your tank, like crushed coral or Texas Holy Rock, which you see some in my background here, bicarbonate, remineralization products, coral sand. As long as you don't have any of that kind of stuff in your tank already, then that pH from your RO water could drop to 6.5 overnight very easily, just from the respiration of fish, maybe a piece of driftwood in the tank, maybe a couple of plants in the tank, would all cause that bufferless pH to crash towards the acidic side, because pH buffers pH is buffered by the hardness of our water. If our water has a high KH and a high GH, very little is going to make that pH drop or raise. Yeah, there you go. So you're dropping half a point of pH overnight because you're not buffering it. Right, Bob says dying and decaying plants will cause a crash too. And Ruru brings up the point that I'm trying to swing around to here, is that fish are able to adjust to slow changes. A change that takes a week or 3 or 4 days, a fish's body can adjust to that swing. But if you change the temperature by 4 degrees instantly, if you change the pH either up or down by a huge degree, like say 3 points overnight, that's going to cause your fish to be in severe stress. If you change the oxygen content of your water drastically overnight, your fish are going to be gasping at the surface. If you change the CO2 content, any kind of large swing of the water parameters in our tanks can cause our fish to, one, go into stress, then the weakest or a sickly one may die, which will cause a domino effect, which may kill all of our fish. And that's just by something like having the power go out and a heater goes off and the temperature drops 4 or 5 degrees in a very short period of time. Babe, this will be back up on my channel. I save all my live streams, and except for the test ones that went very badly. So yes, you'll be able to see it all over again. You could watch it 100 times. So, we're talking about a fish, a wild Ultim Angel in the wild is in a Blackwater river, and it is living in 4 to 3.8 pH, and there is nothing in that water to buffer it. There are decaying leaves from the trees that have fallen into the water. There are fruit and fruiting bodies that have fallen into the water and been eaten by fish, pacus, whatever happens to be in that water system will feast on that stuff that falls into the river. And then all that stuff, like Bob's good point, is rotting in the river itself. It's breaking down. The acidic stuff is breaking it down. So when you get an Ultim Angel shipped straight from the wild to you, let's say you've got an importer's license, and you get that Ultim Angel shipped straight to you, your local airport, and you go down and you pick up all 20 of them that you got shipped in, and you take them home and open the bag. You have a highly acidic water, and let's say your normal TDS is 300. Those fish will be devastated if you put them from 4.0 pH into a 7.2 300 TDS water right away. On the first hand, it will be because there's such a huge shock from the swing in pH, from the swing in TDS, and by the second stage, those fish have been living in an acidic environment that does not support certain diseases, pathogens, amoebas, anything that might be worms, anything that might cause normal fish in a normal 7.5 tank to suddenly get a disease doesn't exist in that dark water, low pH, AL river that they come from. So suddenly they're going to be exposed to this huge smack of pH change, and that's going to be followed right up while they're stressed with another huge smack of suddenly all these diseases that they have never been exposed to before. So it's a double whammy when you get something in from a very low pH wild area. Now, most of the time when we get Ultim Angels, they have been brought in by an importer that understands that they need to very slowly wean these fish off of 4.0 pH onto 7.5, and they'll do that a little bit at a time. They'll put RO water that's had a little acid added to it in the tank with the fish, and then slowly do less acid, and then slowly start adding mineralization until these fish have a fighting chance to develop immunity and to adjust themselves to the high pH and the high TDS of our local water. And that's just one example of how what your tap water is needs to be recognized in relation to the type of fish that you get when you go out and buy a fish. And Babe says that her phone battery's about to die. And thank you for the info, Dwayne, and I'll be back later to catch up for sure. Babe, thanks for stopping by. Ruru asks if there's any breeders that sell F1 or F2 Altum Angels that are bred with higher pH water. And Ruru, I'm going to reference you to Charles, and I'm going to reference you to Bob, and I'm going to reference you to the Wild Spot. I mean the Wet Spot, not the Wild Spot. The Wet Spot, because the Wet Spot is really good at adjusting wild fish to native waters, although the pH in the TDS in Washington and Oregon is a little different than it is in the rest of the country, because they have very little hardness in their local water, but they will still try to adjust them to the water that they're going to end up in all over the place. Well, Psychedelic Babe, thanks for stopping by, and maybe you ought to look into getting an upgrade on that battery. So that was my thinking on this topic, is that we need to be able to marshal tools that if our TDS is low, if our KH is low, if our GH is low in our tap water, like we're talking about in the Washington, Oregon area, they have really low, their water comes out at like 30 or 40 TDS, their local water. We need to understand what it is that we need to do and how we can do it. If we suddenly decide with 30 or 40 local TDS that we want to put together a tank of African cichlids, and African cichlids will easily live in 800 TDS water, and I mean water that is yeah, it's always going to be slim pickings at your local PetSmart. The big box chains aren't interested in selling weird fish. They're just selling what they think is going to sell as fast. Welcome to the stream, Jordan's Fish Room, and welcome to the stream, Debbie Clayton. So let's say that you've got a TDS of 200. Your KH and your GH add up to about 200 coming out of your tap. And you want to put together a tank of African cichlids. And you want to get to 600 TDS, high KH, high GH, which is the water that those African cichlids are comfortable with in the wild. Now, you should always test or find out what the TDS is of the water from the wholesaler or the buyer, the seller that you're buying from is. Excuse me. Because you don't want to try to force a fish that has been living in 300 TDS suddenly to live in 600 TDS. Although I will say from my experience that it is much easier for a fish to overcome a higher TDS. You know, say you're running 200 TDS and the water that you're adding to do a water change is 250 TDS. The fish have a lot better shot at surviving a change that is an increase in TDS than they will if it is a decrease of TDS or hardness or KH or GH. See you, Yama. Thanks for stopping by. And so if you want to get your local water, tap water, yeah, Ruru, I'm sure that they do still import wild Africans. Now, sometimes they may be importing them from Germany, or some breeder in Taiwan that's great at breeding African cichlids. I'm not sure how many wild caught Africans come into the country every year now. I don't have any of those numbers at all. But let's talk about the methods that you can use to get your TDS from 200 to 600. And there are a lot of methods. You can go to the fish store and buy remineralization products that will raise your TDS, that will raise your KH, or that will raise your GH. And you can get products that will raise all of those at once. But those products that you add to remineralize water, if you've got plants growing in the tank, those plants are going to pull those minerals out of the water. So it will behoove you to have, you could add coral, bleached coral from the ocean, real live coral. You can add some clam shells. You can add large snail shells, like apple snail shells. The calcium in them will slowly dissolve in a slightly acidic water, like a 7.0 or a 6.8. And Ruru is saying crushed coral is the easiest one. Well, to me, Texas Holy Rock, which is basically calcium, a calcium rock, is the easiest, because I just stick those rocks in there and they serve the purpose of hiding areas and algae growing areas, and they slowly release calcium into the water. You can use, there are a lot of calcium bearing rocks that, while they aren't the best choices in some fish tanks, they are a good choice in a tank like we're talking about, where you're trying to increase your TDS, your KH, your GH by 400. So it helps if you know beforehand, and maybe even have these things on hand so that you can easily use them. You can put crushed coral in a bag and stick it in your hang-on back filter. You can stick it in your canister filter. Oyster shells are always usable, although you might check where they came from and how well cleaned they are, and you might rinse them off real good before you use them. But what I'm trying to get at is that you need to be able to marshal products, have them at your disposal, so that if you're using RO water, you can remineralize. If you're buying a fish or even a shrimp that requires really hard water and you don't have really hard water, or you're using RO water, that you know what you can add to your tank and what effect that will have on the hardness of your water. There are a lot of things that when you add them to the tank, they are going to decrease the hardness of your water. Like Bob was talking about earlier, decaying plants. If you have plants in your tank, if you have pothos growing outside of your tank, but the roots are in your tank, those things are going to pull minerals out of the water. If you have, like Eco Complete, if you have a substrata that is designed to draw minerals out of the water and hold them for plants to use from their roots, then that will also drop King Lee is asking me what the best way to keep your pH at around 5.5. King, large swings in water, if you've got neutral water coming out of your tap and you want to hold your pH at 5.5, any kind of extreme edges of pH, like pH 9 or pH 4, are always more difficult to maintain because it's a balancing act. It's a balancing act of what you're adding to the water to get it to stay that way and what your tank water is doing to buffer itself back up again. So anytime you're trying to go for a large swing, King Lee, I would say that your best bet is to use RO water and to let it add something to the RO water that will start the process of dropping your pH down. Say your RO water's coming out at 6.8. You might try a little bit of acid in the water, and you need to look up what kind of acid to use exactly, but you can put a few drops of something that is highly acidic into that water and then test the pH so that you can figure out how much of that product you need to add to your 5-gallon bucket of that water. And then you need to, once you get a formula for what you need to put in that water to keep it that low or to bring it down to that low point, you need to watch that water closely and see what it does over a period of time, because anything that you're trying to keep in a pH of 5.5 is going to have serious difficulty if overnight that pH drops to 4.0, or if overnight it raises back up to 6.8. Either one of those extremes is going to cause severe stress in whatever you're trying to keep at 5.5. So you need to test it out in a bucket, a 5-gallon bucket with an air stone in it. And by the way, an air stone is also going to affect the pH in your water. Injected CO2 is going to affect the pH in your water. So you need to understand the recipe that you need to use to get that 5.5 pH, and then also understand what it is that you need to add to that water, to that tank, that will hold the pH down without crashing it. And that may be a couple of pieces of manzanita driftwood. That may be several plants that are going to pull some of the minerals out of the water. That may be leaf litter, which will hold the pH down, will not let it rise very much. It's hey, Big E's, welcome to the stream. It's a crapshoot, King Lee, and yeah, the swing's going to kill your fish or shrimp or whatever it is that you're trying to keep. So anytime, the one thing that I can tell you that I highly recommend that you don't use is buffer products. Products that say pH down or pH up, because those products will run their course in a matter of a day or even a matter of 8 hours, depending on what your yeah, Debbie's giving you a perfect example of what can happen. So, King, what I'm telling you is that yes, there are things that you can do that will, one, lower pH, especially of RO water, which basically has no buffer at all. But you need to be very careful about how low it goes, how much it swings. you're balancing on a knife edge, trying to hold water that's not naturally at 5.5 at 5.5. I'd almost recommend that you go for 6.0, because 6.0 is just high enough that it has a little tiny bit of buffering quality in it, so it's going to try to slowly increase a little. It's not going to naturally crash. And then add like a piece of driftwood and watch it real closely so that you see, like Debbie's giving you the example of, pH dropping from 7.6 to 6.4 in 3 days and killing a beta. So you need to understand that there are going to be swings, and you need to figure out a method to make those swings lessen, to make them stay in the area that you want. I mean, you may literally have to add driftwood, live plants that are going to survive in a low pH, which are very few, and something like leaf litter to a tank. And then you may slowly have to add a couple of apple snail shells, large apple snail shells, to give that water just enough buffering quality so that it can maintain. It's still going to be swinging, but you're going to try to get it to swing a little bit less and a little bit less. And so you're going to have to play with it. You're going to have a recipe. You're going to have an understanding of what it's going to do over a week, what it's going to do over 2 weeks, what it's going to do every time you add water to it, what it's going to do basically at night when the plants in your tank quit producing oxygen, which does one thing to the pH, and start producing CO2, which will lower the pH in your tank. So you've got all these swings trying to happen all at once, and you really need to work hard at coming up with a recipe and a methodology to hold that pH where it is. And while 4.0 or 9.0 are more difficult, even people that have 7.1 or 6.8 or 7.5 or 6.5 need to do exactly the same thing, only with they've got a little bit more leeway. The swing isn't going to be quite as hard. It's not going to be quite as difficult to maintain. There's a little room for CO2 production at night and oxygen production in the day. So the more extreme the pH situation is, the more difficult it is to maintain. I don't know if that's going to help you very much, King Lee. I would advise you to spend quite a bit of time researching this subject on the internet and asking people that might be keeping fish. David McMenemy, welcome to the stream. That's a name I don't recognize. I hope that I've given you some sort of an answer, King Lee. I'm sure that I'm not giving you the answer that you want, which is to go out and buy product A and add it to the water, and your water will be 5.5 from then on out, no matter what you do to it. That's not going to happen. When I moved from Plano, Texas, with my over 100 line-bred Jack Dempseys, where I was basically trying to get more spangles and more density of spangles, but I had been line breeding for 10 years and raising up and pairing off and selling off my fry that I didn't pick to keep. I moved from Plano, Texas to Indianapolis, and I knew that the water was going to be harder in Indianapolis than it is in Texas. The water's pretty hard in Texas, but it's not the same hardness that you get in Indianapolis, where you're basically sitting right on top of calcium rock and the water's being drawn through it continuously. And so this was in 1995. And in 95, basically what we had was pH up and pH down products. There wasn't a lot of remineralization products. There wasn't a lot of understanding that you might be able to use some slight acidic product, like vinegar or pickle juice or something like that. Not that those are usable, but something like that you can, I think some people use carbolic acid, a little bit of carbolic acid to drop pH. But I had 8 60-gallon totes with battery-operated air pumps in them, and I brought over 100 Dempseys, and I had all kinds of catfish that I brought as well. And well, Debbie, Dwain thinks he's very experienced and very knowledgeable, but Dwain's not always right, so take everything that I say with a very large grain of salt. Anyway, I had all these fish, and I had several hundred gallons of water that I knew I was bringing because I was going to have difficulty setting them up raw. I also had a couple of sponge filters and some of my canister biomaterial in those things, hoping to keep it alive as much as possible. So when I got up to Indianapolis and I got all my stuff moved in, I set up a 150-gallon tank with 3/4 water from the totes that the fish were in, and 1/4 water from the tap treated. And I put all my biomaterial in there and left it in there for about 8 hours. And that was my fish were starting to really show stress in their tubs. So I bit the bullet. I did a TDS test, and I was showing, well, I didn't have a TDS meter at that time, but my pH was showing at about 7.8, which my normal pH in Texas was about 7.2, 7.3. And I knew that it was a pretty big swing, but I decided that I couldn't wait any longer, and I put all of my fish in that 150-gallon tank. Just because there was 1/4 of new water, there were canister filters running, there were hang-on-the-back filters running, there was air stones running, so they would be in a better situation than they were in the buckets. And I started watching that, and my pH started rising. And I knew that I had to do something, and so I had some pH down, and I put it in the tank. And it dropped it right down to 7.5, and I watched it for a couple of hours, and it hung at 7.5. So I was tickled to death, and I went to bed because it was real late at night when I had finally finished doing all that. And I went to bed. When I woke up the next morning, 3/4 of the fish in that tank were dead. I checked the pH, and it was almost 8. That pH down product had buffered the water for about 5 hours and then completely gave it up. And the pH spiked so rapidly that it killed almost all of the fish in the tank. And I lost every single Jack Dempsey that I had. I lost most of my catfish. I think I ended up with about 4 fish that survived that entire experience. Now, part of it was that I had all those fish in one tank, so that when one of them died, it started a domino. Yeah, it's a sad story, but it's a sad story in the sense that it was bad that it happened to my fish. It was bad that I lost all that breeding, inline breeding that I had done. But you got to take all this stuff with a grain of salt. You got to be able to recognize that it's a learning experience. Yes, I just killed a bunch of fish. Oh my God, I'm so torn up inside because I lost all these fish. I've lost thousands of dollars worth of fish. Yes, all those things are true. But what's important is that you need to recognize that you need to do something to understand what happened and do your best to see that nothing like that ever happens again. And, you know, it's a learning process. This whole hobby is a learning process of making mistakes, getting over the grieving, recognizing it as a growing experience, and then doing all the research you can and talking to all the people that you can so that you begin to understand what happened to begin with, and secondly, what it was you could have done to make the situation a little better, and thirdly, what you're going to do in the future to keep anything like that from happening again. Because that's what we've got to do in this hobby. We've got to progress. We've got to use bad experiences as a way to get better at what we do in fish keeping. If you're not going to get better at fish keeping, you're going to keep killing fish by the same mistakes over and over and over again, you know. So that's why I'm talking about hardness in this stream, is because it's a critical issue. It's a very complex issue. Hey, Jeremy, welcome to the stream, man. And right back at you, buddy. And there's Aquaticy. Welcome to the stream. And people hate it when you preach at them. So I'm just trying to talk to people and give them the benefit of some of the experiences I've gone through. Losing all those fish over a period of 2 days was a terrible experience. I wouldn't recommend that anybody go through it. I would highly recommend that everyone do their due diligence and research and learn so that they don't have to go through that experience, or at least so that they can modify that experience a little better. But you know, this is all a process. Hey, Rob Hicks, and happy Canada Day to you too. Dion says, exactly. If you keep killing fish, try something different. I believe it's all about learning. What is the needs for your fish you're keeping first? Yeah. Dion, I've watched you. I've watched you progress. I've watched you make mistakes. I've watched people correct you. I've watched you try your best to modify your behavior to correct those mistakes. I applaud you greatly. If I'd have done one of your live streams or one of your videos for your contest about why you like watching Dion so much, and I had intended to, but life just kind of got me down right then and I didn't get around to it. I kept putting it off. That's what I would have said, that the reason why I watch Dion's channel is because Dion is learning. He's filling his plate up much fuller than he can eat. His eyes are much bigger than his stomach is, but the man does his best to deal with the load that he's taken on. He does his best to learn from people that give him good advice and try to modify his behavior. And when he has had problems, when he has lost fish, he tries to do the work so that he won't lose those fish again. Now, I would have to quibble with your, if you keep killing fish, try something different, because it's not something different What you need to do is something that is based more on knowledge that you have gained about that issue, so that you can improve what you do, not just do something different, because there are a lot of different things that you can do that will be oh so much worse. So you got to put the research in there, you got to put the understanding, you got to put the recognition in there, so that you improve your fish's chances of survival. JC's Tanks says, yep, I know how that feels. I lost a whole batch of angelfish fry and then $150 of new angels this week. Man, I feel you. I feel for you. I've been there. I've done that. It's a bad feeling, but please recognize that after you get over the grief of having lost those, that you need to rededicate yourself to the hobby. You need to rededicate yourself to understanding the mistakes that you made. You need to find out exactly what happened as much as you possibly can, so that you never repeat that mistake again. That's why losing that much stuff isn't necessarily a bad thing if you try to better yourself because of it. Not you lose $150 of new angels and then 2 weeks from now you go out and buy another $150 worth of new angels and they die again exactly the same way. That's not helping. You're not improving your skills then. Aquaticy says, one of the things I really appreciate about your channel is the fact that you are old school like me and you're teaching from experience. Yeah. Aquaticy, I've done almost every mistake there is to do in this hobby, believe me. And while losing all those, my precious Jack Dempseys that I'd line bred for 10 years really hurt, I've had experiences that I consider far worse than that. The experience I had losing 150 gallons worth of 14-inch clown loaches that I just knew I was going to be the first one in the United States to breed clown loaches because I had 6 of them over 14 inches in a 110-gallon tank, 150-gallon tank. And I had a few other fish. I had some bickers in there and a couple of other fish that I can only hold back my need to overstock something so far. But I lost all those fish to TB, to fish tuberculosis. And I lost them over a period of a week. And there was literally nothing I could do about it. Nothing that I had in my arsenal to treat fish with had any effect on them at all. It was so devastating to me that I took one of those 15-inch clown loaches to a local laboratory and I said, I want to know exactly what killed this fish so that I never experience this horrible experience again, so that I understand what it is that I did wrong and what it is that I need to do in the future to prevent this from ever happening again. Believe me, if you think killing $150 worth of angels is bad, wait till fish tuberculosis hits one of your tanks and you lose everything in such a devastating manner that it just floors you. That experience was far worse than losing my 100 Jack Dempsey's line bred. And what I'm telling you is, IFG ran a episode on this, a video on this the other day. And one of the people that he used as one of his collabs described his worst day in fish keeping as the day he tried to get a background out of a 100-gallon tank and it fought him continuously, and he was so frustrated and angry that he wanted to punch the tank, and he got really angry. Oh my God. I wrote back and said, my God, I'm so glad that is the worst thing that's ever happened to you in fish keeping. There are much worse things that can happen. And that fish tuberculosis episode is not the worst experience I've had in fish keeping. Having 3 23, 24-inch full-grown pacus that I had rescued from local fish stores where they were like mascots, and I had one of my 150s come open, and I thought, you know what, I bet I could go around and gather up a bunch of those gigantic pacus, because I love pacus, and I thought I could go around and gather up a bunch of those big pacus and keep them in this 150 if I didn't have anything else in the tank besides filtration, a covered heater, and several of these giant pacus. Hey Charles, welcome to the stream. I kept those pacus. I probably put 3 inches on them while I had them, probably 6, 8, 9 months. I love those pacus. They're one of my favorite fish. They are the most personable fish. People hate them, they despise them, but they are one of the most personable fish you'll ever keep, is a large pacu. They're like big puppies. And one night I was living in Plano, Texas, and I had that 150-gallon behind a very heavy curtain by my front window, just enough that it got a little light through the curtain that kind of lit the tank up. I didn't have any lights on the tank at all. I just let ambient light and the light of all my other fish tanks light it up, because pacus like it kind of dark anyway. One night, one of my chows woke me up in the middle of the night, barking, really barking like something was really wrong, and I heard thunder crash, and I jumped up out of my bed, and as I ran in the dark into my living room, I realized I was standing in about 1.5 inches of water in my living room. And through the lightning flashes, I got a picture of that 150-gallon tank with a 3/4 inch rent open seam at the top on the left-hand side of the tank, where those 3 pacus had been side by side in that tank when a bolt of lightning had struck just outside of the window, and they had all bolted at once instantaneously and put out so much pressure that it literally rent the top of that 150 open. It broke the seam and forced the top of the glass out without breaking the glass. It was so much pressure that it literally ripped the tank open. And that's 7/8 glass that they blew open like that. So I fought all night trying to keep those fish alive. 2 of them had jumped out of the tank and they expired pretty quickly, but one of them was still in the tank in about 2 inches of water, and I fought all night to keep her alive, and then she died on me too. That was probably my low point in the hobby, was that something like that had happened to me. So don't be too sure that what just happened to you, no matter how bad it is your low point in the hobby, because I'm going to tell you it can get a lot worse. Okay guys, I've been running over an hour. My wife just got home. I'm going to shut down the stream. I appreciate everybody listening to me rant and rave, and I'll talk to you guys next week. Good luck, YouTube.